Welcome to the first training video in the AR and Collections Manager series, setting up collections representatives. You'll notice on the screen in Business Central that we've added in a function up here called AR and Collections, which when you click on it will allow you to be able to see all of the AR and Collections functions in the system. The first thing we want to do is go to Collections Representatives. This is absolutely mandatory because as I mentioned in the introduction video, any user that is not in this list will not be able to click on anything else except this list. It's absolutely mandatory that you at least have one representative in this list. You can have as many as you want, but there has to be at least one. So now I'm going to add in a second representative. We click on the little three-dot ellipsis and we see a list of all of the users that are in the system. So we're going to add Chris, and we're going to add Mary, and we're going to add we're going to add John, and we'll add Steve. Now the next part, if the names don't come down, you may want to add in the names so that they display properly in the rest of the system. So we'll just put in Mary and John and Steve. The second field, allow write-off. If you want to use the write-off functionality, which we'll go over in a separate video, you need to put a check mark in this column for each user. Some users may be able to write off amounts and some may not. Let's jump over to the level column. There are three different levels. This is a reports to hierarchy. So in this case, I've set Bob up as the level 1 person. There can only be one level 1 person. So let's make Chris a level 2 person. Now, a level 2 person might be a supervisor. The level 1 might be the CFO, or might be in a larger organization the person responsible for collections. Level 2 might be a department or a company supervisor. And the threes are the people who actually do the work. Now we're going to say that the level 2 person, and we'll see when we get to the details why we want to have a reports to. It's not absolutely mandatory, but once we get into some advanced topics later on, we may need it. So a level 1 person doesn't report to anybody. The level 2 reports to level 1. The level 3 reports to the level 2 person, and all of them report to the level 2 person. Now you can have them report to each other. You can have it set up any way you want. If you put an email address in here, you'll be able to use the internal messaging system that will send an email when certain events happen. All right, let's go back to the write-off. Now, we have a level 1 person. Bob is a level 1 person. Now, maybe we want to set it up so that Bob, since he's a level 1, he's the CFO, he can write off whatever amount he wants. So only for a level 1 person, if you put 0 in here, then it's unlimited write-off capability. Everybody else, first thing you might have to do is say allow write-off, and then you can put in an amount. If they try to write off a transaction that exceeds the amount here, they'll get an error message. So we'll say, well, let's just fix this. Just to be neat. And we tab off onto that. And we're going to say that everybody's allowed to write things off, but the level 3 people are limited to $50. Now allow implementation write-off. When you're doing a write-off, write-offs are designed to be done only on invoices that have been paid short and have a small remaining balance. If you're going to write off an entire invoice, you should properly use a credit memo. So we've said in this case that we're going to have these limits. Now, we've added some functionality into the system that every time a payment is posted to a customer against an invoice that is less than the full amount of the invoice, automatically that invoice is going to be entered into the exception list and it will be flagged as having been paid short. Now we'll talk a little bit about that when we start talking about write-offs a little more in depth. But when you first put the software in place, there may be payments that have been made before the software was in place that were in fact short paid invoices but don't have the flag write-off, which you'll see when we get into the exception list. So if you want to be able to write off a transaction that is not flagged as having been paid short, this is something that might be done during implementation in order to be able to clean up the accounts receivable list and the exception list. And this should be unchecked after the initial cleanup is done. So this is a temporary setting, and we're going to uncheck them for now so we can see what the effect is. Allow credit memo creation. If you want to be to these people to be allowed to create a credit memo from within the collections system, you need to put a check mark. Note that if we say for John, if John is not going to be allowed to write off anything, then when we get into the exception list, we will not see any of the write-off fields and columns. Only if they're checked will you be able to see them, and the same goes for credit memos. If this is checked, then you'll see the link to create a credit memo. If it's not checked, then the user will not see the link to be able to create a credit memo. Delete allowed. From time to time, during negotiations for payments, sometimes it's a good idea to extend the terms and make a transaction no longer overdue, to give them another month to pay it. So you can go into the customer ledger entry table today without our software, and you can edit the due date of a posted sales invoice. All you need to do is just click on the due date and change it. Well, if you do that, then the invoice is no longer due. But once the system has identified it as an overdue invoice, you will need to delete it in order to get it off the list. Every time you delete something, each time you run the generate and update exceptions routine, which we'll get to in a second, it will reevaluate each invoice. So the fact that you delete the exception doesn't mean that it won't come back. It will. So delete allowed can be useful if you have an account, for example, that you didn't realize was going to show up and you want to delete the exceptions to clean up your exception list, then you will want to put a check mark in delete allowed. Read-only access. Since everybody that in order to be able to view the data in the collections module, you must be in this list. There are some people, for example, salespeople, that you might not want to have them give them the ability to make entries and change things so that they're granted read-only access. They can look at data, but they can't change anything. So that completes the setup for the collections representatives. Now, if you look under here, we're going to go into this at the very end, because this will allow you to transfer accounts, exceptions from one user to another. We'll talk about that in a little bit. That concludes the setup of the collections representatives.